Who knows how to draw those curtains for me? Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Pad Paramahansa. Rudrakacharya Ashtotar to the Śrīmad, His Divine Grace, Srila C. Bhakti-vedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Rudrakacharya Ashtotar to the Śrīmad, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Dhrantaraj Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta-vrinda ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Narayanam namaskritya Narang chaiva narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamadirayet. Before reciting the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which is our very means of conquest, we should offer our respectful obeisances unto Lord Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author, and unto Srila Prabhupada, the translator, commentator, and our spiritual master. Nashtaprayesha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktim Bhavati Naishtiki. By regular attendance in classes on Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam and by rendering devotional service to the pure devotee, all that is inauspicious within the heart is destroyed almost to nil, and loving devotion to the Supreme Lord, who is glorified in transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 30th day of June, 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti-vedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in Canto 5, the creative impetus, chapter 1, the activities of Maharaj Priyavrata, text number 2. Nunam mukta sanganam tadashanam dvijarshaba griheshu abhinivesho ayam pungsam bhavitum arhati nanunam mukta sanganam tadashanam dvidarshabha grihesh abhiniveshoyam pungsam bhavitum arhati nanunam mukta sanganam tadashanam dvidarshabha grihesh abhiniveshoyam pungsam bhavitum arhati. Please chant. Nanunam mukta sanganam tadishanam dvijarshabha grihesh abhiniveshoyam pungsam bhavitum arhati. Nanunam mukta sanganam tadashanam dvijarshabha grihesh abhiniveshoyam abhinam arhati. Nanunam mukta sanganam tadashanam dvijarshabha grihesh abhiniveshoyam pungsam bhavitum arhati. Na, not. Nunam, certainly. Mukta sanganam, who are free from attachment. Tadashanam, such. Dvija Rishabha, O greatest of the Brahmins. Griheshu, to family life. Abhiniveshaha, excessive attachment. Ayam, this. Pungsam, of persons. Bhavitum, to be. Arhati, is possible. Translation. So this is Maharaj Pariksit speaking. Devotees are certainly liberated persons. Therefore, O greatest of the Brahmins, they cannot possibly be absorbed in family affairs. Purport. In the Bhakti-rasāmṛta-sindhu, it is said that by executing devotional service to the Lord, one can understand the transcendental position of the living being and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be understood by any means except bhakti. The Lord confirms this in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam 11:14-21. Bhaktyāham ekayā grāhyaḥ. Only by executing devotional service can one appreciate me. Similarly, in the Bhagavad-gītā 18:55, Lord Krishna says, Bhaktyāham abhijānāti. Simply by discharging devotional service, one can understand me. Thus, for a bhakta to become attached to family affairs is impossible, since a bhakta and his associates are liberated. Everyone is searching after ananda or bliss, but in the material world there can never be any bliss. It is possible only in devotional service. Attachment for family affairs and devotional service are incompatible. Therefore, Maharaj Pariksit was somewhat surprised to hear that Maharaj Priyavrata was simultaneously attached to devotional service and to family life. Om jnana-timirandasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshu unmilitam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So here Maharaj Pariksit is continuing to express his surprise
at the news that Maharaj Priyavrata, who had already renounced, he was already instructed by Narada Muni, and he was practicing full-on devotional service and renunciation apart from his family, took up family life again. And it's interesting that the very questions, as they always do, there are certain assumptions here. He says, "O great sage, why did King Priyavrata, who was great self-realized devotee of the Lord, remain in household life, which is the root cause of the bondage of karma and which defeats the mission of human life?" And first of all, he assumes it's translated as remains. But really he didn't remain, he went back. When we learned the pastime, he reluctantly took up the duty again. And it's a illogical question, because Maharaj Parikshit himself had cut all those ties, and he was sitting down listening to Bhagavatam, and he was feeling completely detached from his whole kingdom and the family and everything, because he was ever increasingly attached to Krishna by hearing Bhagavatam. He was directly experiencing it. But what's not understood by Maharaj Parikshit, will become very clear, and at least externally not understood, was that one can, under orders, especially of the spiritual master, in this case Lord Brahma, and the agreement of Narada, eventually, that Maharaj Priyavrata will take this on as a duty. He's going to re-enter household life as a duty, and stay there for some time. As we read the pastime, you'll see that he eventually renounces again, and perform, amazing activities. But he doesn't evince there excessive attachment in the family life. It's assumed that, if he goes back, not assumed. The way the translation is constructed and Bhagavatam is that, if he goes back, it's because he was attached. And therefore, how is that possible, since one who takes on full devotional service gets such a taste for Krishna consciousness that he becomes detached from family, from those things which are normally very, very entangling. But so the point that will be made is that one can remain a Mahabhagavat even in family life and perform wonderful devotional service because of the strength of bhakti when it's practiced properly, that even in the family life, which is normally just by nature so entangling, can remain can be an actual asset for devotional service. We read in the Chaitanya Charitamrita so many wonderful householder devotees of Lord Chaitanya, which he blessed. I think it was mentioned about was Shivananda Sen and his son, who was Lord Chaitanya gave the name, was it Puri Das, I think, and who became Kavi Karnapur, a great poet who wrote that play, was it the Chaitanya Chandra, the Nataka? What is it? Anandamadan Champu. Yes, and so that was all very authorized and very blessed. So yes, at a certain point, you'll find that even Bhaktivinoda Thakur is famous for being a householder. Of course, he had Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as his son, but he had 9 other children, and he was engaged in the service, of working. He was a high court judge, but eventually, the last stage, he also isolated himself from the family. So it's that's one of the lessons that we're going to learn here, is that what counts really is the state of your consciousness. Yes, it may be more difficult in household life, but it's possible. And one can get the full blessings of the Lord by living in household life, raising Krishna conscious children. I remember a memorable class I heard Prabhupada give, and he was talking about this subject. And he said, after all, he was talking about great acharyas like Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya, and in our own line, much more. I mean, Madhva's kind of in our own line, but great acharyas like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who they were all born of from women and raised as children. In other words, sex life has to go on for society to go on and for the movement to expand. But there's a way of doing it that's within devotional service. As Krishna famously says, Dharma varudho bhuteshu kamosmi bhadatarshava. That I am sex life that is not contrary to religious principles. And we need to find out what those are and how to engage in family life so that it's not a deep, dark well. It's interesting that Prahlad Maharaj, when he was answering his father's first question, Prabhupada always quoted this verse. His father says, what's the best thing you learned? And expecting to hear some account of, I learned some Machiavellian things, how to make enemies, you make friends and kill your enemies. But no, he says, Tat sadhamanye asudavārya dehinam sadasamudvigna dhyāma sadgrahat. Hitvatma patam griyamanda kupam vanam gadoyat hadamashriyeta. Very pertinent to the discussion. So he says, O Father, and then Prabhupada says, actually he didn't say Father. He says, O best of the demons, right? Asuravarya. Here's what the best thing I learned. Best for whom? Prabhupada says, Dehinam, for all embodied living beings, who are sadasamudvigna, always disturbed in mind. Why? Asadgrahat. I love this word, asadgrahat. Asat means the temporary. Grahat means holding it on with dear life, In other words, completely absorbed in and attached to. The temporary, the body and its extensions, It's naturally it's going to produce anxiety, because eventually, by the course of time, there'll be danger to your own body, and the whole situation will become disturbed, like we have now with the COVID, and this produces a tremendous amount of anxiety. So this is called udvigna, and he says sada some udvigna, not just udvigna. Some udvigna means completely disturbed. So in that situation, what to do? And he says hitvatmapatam griyamandakupam. So he says one should give up hitvatmapatam, the griyamandakupam, the griha which is an andakupa, which is a deep dark well of illusion. And then what? That's not the end of it. Vanam gadol yadhadamashriyeta. Go to the forest, and here it's understood, it's Vrindavan, and take shelter of Hari. Now for Hiranyakashipu, the word Hari was like the last thing you wanted to hear, right? It was like kicking a snake, And he became very angry. But he wasn't so angry at Prahlad at that point, because Prahlad was just a little student. He looked menacingly at Shanda and Amarka, the teachers. What have they been teaching him? We didn't do it. We didn't do it. And then when they got Prahlad back in the classroom, they said, "Where did you learn this? Where did you learn?" He was trying to get it out of him. So, but Prahlad himself, Prabhupada always calls him, even from childhood, Prahlad Maharaj. And when he grew up, he took over the kingdom. I mean, when Hiranyakashipu was killed, he was still a child, but eventually he became the leader there. But he remained completely transcendental. As he says, Naiva Udvijay, the same word, Udvija. He says, I'm not disturbed at all, ever. As he proved by all that torture that was going on, and he remained completely equipoised. Because wherever I am, in any situation, I can chant your glories, Tadviya Gayana Mahamrita Magna Chitta, and dive into an ocean of nectar. And he proved it by tolerating and remaining completely Krishna conscious in all circumstances. But famously he said, I am lamenting for the conditioned souls, and therefore I'm going to stay here. I'm not going to go off to the forest. So he stayed. He was a king. He ruled, but he remained completely Krishna conscious. So that's one of the lessons that we'll hear here. And also, as we pointed out, there's a hierarchy. Now, Narada Muni, we heard how he convinced the Haryashvas and the Shavalasvas, the sons of Daksha, to take sannyas. The Daksha sent them off to, just like Prachanabhari sent the Prachetas off to perform austerities, in order to become fit for being progenitors. This is completely unheard of in the West. But become Krishna conscious and austere and self-controlled, and then they can, have so many descendants. So the Prachetas were sent off, and I lost the train. Anyway, the Haryasvas was sent off, and they were starting to do their austerities, and Narada Muni comes and gives them this little riddle. You remember? It's like a riddle about the river that's going two ways at once and all these things. And they being as intelligent as they were, they understood completely. And then they sang their little song, Kimasat karma bi bhavet. That's the verses. Each verse ends with this line. Therefore, what's the use of karmic activities? And by the time they were through, they were completely detached. And then they went off. In other words, instead of doing the austerities and then going back and getting married and doing the whole thing, they took on the mood of the Kumaras. Remember the Kumaras? They were also supposed to be progenitors at first. Brahma, after he was enlightened by Krishna, he had a lot of work to do. The big headache, or shall I say headaches, was to populate the universe, right? So he starts with the Kumaras, but they don't want to do it. They want to stay brahmacharis. And by the force of their austerity and their tejas, they stay at 6 years old. But they're great sages, And so that angered Brahma, and then from the middle of his forehead, came Shiva. He was frowning, And then he started again, and then some demons came forth and attacked him. And it wasn't a smooth operation because it's material in many ways. He was trying to engage the material energy to populate the universe so that those who needed to fulfill their karma would take birth and the whole thing would take place. So this is one of the entanglements where, just like we have in our own society, when Srila Prabhupada, it's interesting because there's a parallel here. Devotees join and dancing and chanting. And then Prabhupada would say, oh, now you go to Germany and start a center. Shivananda. I think Shivananda, remember? I mean, that's a surrender. Alone. I think he must have happened to know German. He probably knew German like I knew German. I studied 4 years in high school, German, And, okay, maybe he had a year or two. But the point is, it was a tremendous surrender. But he did that, and was an exalted service, and he made tremendous advancement by surrendering to that order. So similarly, temple president, I think, is probably one of the most difficult jobs. You were here for a few months, I think, and we've had a succession. Because just imagine, you're dealing with all of the material things you have to deal with. Take care of the devotees, protect, make sure that all this stuff. There's always, and you're not just dealing with controlling your own mind. You have to worry with everybody else's mind and what they're doing also. So it's a service that some great souls have done that. Very, very few for years and years. I'm thinking specifically of Srivas, who's been temple president for 40 years or something. But it's similar to this situation, where there's an order, that comes down, especially during Prabhupada's time, and when you surrender to it and take it on. Yes, it's difficult and austere, but you make tremendous advancement by doing that. And that's the way the movement can go on. Someone has to run the temples, So imagine running the whole universe, or running, just the whole earth. How difficult that is. So Maharaj Parikshit knew from experience how difficult that was. He renounced, and he is now completely absorbed in hearing and chanting. And for him, it's a perfectly logical thing. He knows he's going to die in 7 days. So traditionally, when you get the notice at a certain age, Prabhupada would say, at 50 you should start and being renounced. Okay, you have your wife and your children. The children are hopefully a little grown up. You can go with your wife on pilgrimage, different places, vanaprastha. But there's no physical contact or anything like that. And at a certain point, the wife is sent back and be under the care of the elder sons, and you take sannyas, So the whole idea is that inside or outside of family life, or any situation you're in, the bottom line is you have to embrace vairagya. Was it Raghunath Das Goswami who talked about embracing the goddess of vairagya? In other words, there's that verse, vairagya ragada sakobhava bhakti nishta. I like the chant. It's taught to me by Mahavishnu Maharaj the Elder. You remember him? And it's one of these verses that try to wake you up. It's like it's a serious word. Dehishtimang sururi devi matam chajassa. Jaya sutari sadam mamatam vimuncha. Pashyani shaman chagaditam chanabanga dishtam. Vairagya raga rasikobhava bhakti nishtam. Don't love the body, just a bag of flesh and blood and bone. Give up your sense of ownership. And this is the actual line, which I usually kind of soften a little bit. Don't give up your sense of ownership for wife and kids and home. At every moment, see that your world totters on destruction. Become detached and learn to love the Lord without obstruction. That last line goes like this: Vairagya raga. Become attached to detachment. It's a very nice concept. In other words, embrace it as a wonderful raga, and then become a rasika. You can't develop the taste for Krishna consciousness to the level that really is beckoning to us. That it's, until you are serious about cultivating that vairagya. Vairagya vidya bhakti yoga. It's in that famous verse about Lord Chaitanya. Krishna came as Lord Chaitanya to give his own service, which is characterized by detachment and knowledge. Vairagya vidya bhakti yoga shikshartam. In order to teach that, Lord Krishna came as Lord Chaitanya. Krishna came in the form of Lord Chaitanya. He's an ocean of mercy, for basins. So we should embrace that. So the point here is that, and this is, shown again and again in our line, because of the intensity of the transcendental pleasure that can be experienced, especially in Gaudiya Vaishnava practice, one can be in household life and be detached internally, and at the same time become a very advanced devotee and a wonderful preacher and part of the movement. It may be more difficult externally, but it's certainly possible, doable, and both in Lord Chaitanya's time and in Prabhupada's time, we've seen that. It's not easy to do, but it's feasible to do if one is serious and practices intensely and is surrendered. That's the real bottom line. Prahlad Maharaj himself, he stayed in the kingdom, but he was always detached. He was always, relishing Krishna consciousness. So that's one of the lessons that will come out here in the amazing activities of Priyavata that he was involved in the administration of the government, and then eventually, it's always necessary at a certain point, unless you die suddenly, untimely, to detach yourself and become just in samadhi. No more management or anything, just simply hearing and chanting, at a certain point. That's certainly appropriate. So, any discussion on these points? There probably so much more could be said. We have the mic available. There's that mic. Okay. If not, we have something. Okay. Maybe some of our listeners. Hare Krishna. Jai Bhagavan.
So if somebody is helping to manage a temple or doing other management throughout ISKCON, if they're managing in Krishna consciousness, then someone may ask them, what's the use or what's the need of giving it up, because we see within the times of Maharaj Yudhishthira and these different kings, they would give it up, the management
at a certain point.
At a certain point. So, but if someone would say, well, hey, we're managing, a temple for Krishna's pleasure, and it's it's spiritual, and then why do I need to give it up?
Well, one of the things that happens is you get older, and management can be a stressful thing. And you may find, though, over time that it's harder. It may be harder for you to do and engage in those things. I mean, you can't predict what's going to happen in your life. Some disease can come. There's all kinds of reasons. At one point, and one of the main things that happens is there's a new generation that comes up, and you see, people have, devotees have come forward who have the qualities and can manage, just like our own GBC. I mean, really, we should have such an incredible respect and reverence for the GBC to take on the management of this ever-growing, complex society, And it's not like they have a huge bureaucracy or a huge budget, In other words, to run a society this size, you would normally have a whole crew of people on the second level. I know they have some local managers, and they try to develop that. But it really is in many ways, a thankless task. You get criticized and everything like that, but they're doing that. But as we see, they're getting older, and every year, believe me, so for many, many years, they're talking about succession, how we're going to pass on the torch, And now there is some, just like this year, I'm always like in tune with that because I have the Vyasa Puja book, and generally the GBC write, a certain percentage of them anyway. And this year, many of you know Gauranga Prabhu from Chaupati. He's a GBC now. This is great. And so when you have some competent people coming in, that do you know him?
Rajananda Prabhu's asking where he's managing.
What his zone is or something?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. It didn't say. But
it's great news, though.
I'm sure he's taking up some of the duties of Radhanath Swami, in terms of GBC. So the idea is that you feel the need for wanting to be completely absorbed. Just like Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He was doing so much. I mean, he did it so efficiently, the magistrate job, But at a certain point, because of health and whatever, just age, he just wanted to stay in samadhi, completely hearing and chanting and doing just that. So it's a natural progression, and it's understood. It's certainly a bona fide thing to do. After all, why does Priyavata agree? He agrees because, this is the desire of the Lord as expressed by Brahma, who's my guru's guru, and his father happened to be his father also, right? Brahma requested him. And Swayambhuva Manu couldn't convince him. That was his father, but his guru's guru could convince him. And he saw that, okay, this is an important task I have to do. There's no one else who can do it. So at a certain point, after some time, maybe years, and so much, taking on that burden, it's certainly bona fide that you can, step out of it. And that's what, when you read the first canto, the way in which Parikshit gave up his kingdom was unusual. And the question arises, why did he do that? Because it was so important. He was doing such wonderful service, keeping Kali at bay, the story, and, great Rajarshi. And there was a higher need, ultimately for the manifestation of the Bhagavatam was even a better service. And he had someone competent, his son, to take over the kingdom. But that question arose in his case because it was untimely. Now you also have the case of Bharat, who didn't wait till old age; he just gave up, right? When he gave a young wife and everything, he gave it up, and then, eventually he became a deer and whatnot. So there's no hard and fast rule when it can happen. But in this case, we're seeing, I think, the overriding consideration is that it's very much needed for the welfare of the whole universe and world, and which serves as a place where so many people can become Krishna conscious, just like the maintenance of a temple. It's one thing for you to take sannyas, but if there's no one to take over the temple, then how is that a service to Prabhupada? I can imagine so many discussions like that took place. No, we need you, And wonderful thing is when Prabhupada was with us, he was moving people around, and they surrendered. This sannyasi became in charge of this temple, and so many. But after he departed, things changed a little bit, and the flow of authority, wasn't as obvious as when Prabhupada was on the planet when he said something. So in this case, we have that with Brahma. Everybody respects Brahma. He's everyone's guru. And therefore, Priyavata will do this, and we'll see. It's not an easy task, taking care, running the universe. You can imagine, we can hardly run a temple.
One last. What would be your advice for managers in ISKCON in general?
In what sense?
Just maybe something that because a lot of times advice may be like cautionary, things to be careful of, or just whatever,
Well, what I would encourage them to do, because I've seen the problem that arises if they don't do, is to don't think you can sacrifice your sadhana for a constant emergency, management, because everything is founded on that. Your whole desire to serve, your faith, your ability to avoid making offenses. It depends on being Krishna conscious and because otherwise the modes can take over, and that's disastrous. So I would say that emphasize the strong sadhana for everybody in the temple, and that you have to be an example. And that's a key element of management. And we see that the ones who have lasted for years, they do that. You see them, and because this is one of the dangers, is that you have a little temple with 12 devotees, and it's okay, and then it grows, and becomes more difficult to manage. But it's still just one person doing it, In other words, I don't know much about management. I've never done it really, but I've seen how it can be dangerous unless you're very careful to maintain your sadhana, both for yourself and as an example. That's my main advice.
His Holiness Radhanath Swami, he told Vaisheshika Prabhu, who's the temple president up there still in ISV, he told him, the best thing you could do as the temple president is, or one of the best things, or if not the best thing you could do is for you to just be happy, and then that will help the whole.
Yeah. And how can you be happy without strong sadhana?
Yeah.
So they go together. No, that's a fact. Rajendra Nandan, Prabhu?
Thank you for sharing your realizations.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, I put in almost 5 years on temple president management, so I have some understanding. There's different. This purport talks about Bhakti-rasāmṛta-sindhu describing the status of the liberated devotees, not possible for them to become attached to material things. So there are different levels of devotees, and not every manager is on that level. So if in the performance of your duty, you can be very expert at your management, but if you become stuck in the identity that I am the manager, and especially if you are thinking I am the boss, the controller, of devotees, it's not conducive to coming to the platform, understanding our spiritual identity in our relationship with Krishna. And so, just like in Varnashram, it's advised. It's really a young man's duty. It should be. Yeah. Because they have the energy that you touched on that. They have the energy, they have the determination. But elder life is meant for stepping away from all that so you can focus on the direct activities of hearing, chanting, remembering, and sharing, preaching. Yeah. So, if one can do that, if one is on that platform when doing the management, you could say theoretically, it's great. But even then, you have the principle that what a great man does, common men will follow, and there should be succession, and it shouldn't be held on till the very end of your,
sure.
Try and pry it off. It's like, it shouldn't be like that, because part of the the ideal execution of managerial duties is empowerment of others.
Exactly.
You don't. It's not just you. You know, it shouldn't be like that. That's why you get the Atlas results. You know, this is a burden. This is hard. Yeah. But when you empower and you delegate and it spreads, and then you know, that's the way the movement grows,
right.
And it can be passed on in that way.
I mean, how many times, you know, when you read the Lilamrita, you just, you know, hear devotees' remembrances where Prabhupada says, now, you know, I've created this GBC, now just let me write, you know. It never quite got to that point because there's always some emergency letters devotees writing, you know. But Prabhupada was showing, you know, what's really proper at you know, at senior is to hear and chant and preach. And it's just contrast, just see the contrast with the demonic political leaders we have, holding on, especially when they, you know, there's some kind of autocracy, till the final end, you know. In other words, because their whole reason for being there is the control, and I'm the enjoyer, you know, demoniac. Whereas, as you say, the devotees are doing it as a duty, and if they do it right, they're raising up another generation, empowering them, you know, by example. Just as Prabhupada did, he was able to, you know, make managers out of people who never thought they could manage anything, miraculously. So that's a great service, you know, because you can imagine what it's like, you know. You can just imagine. When Prabhupada comes to America, he's completely relying on Krishna, that wonderful prayer, Markani Bhagavad-dharma. If you like Krishna, make my power of speaking such that I can you know, convince them. It's up to you. You brought me here, you know. So he really was completely, at every second, you know, surrendered, and therefore he was empowered. And he was able to attract some very competent people who, when they became Krishna conscious, were able to manage wonderfully, you know, and make the movement grow and like that. But it's for us, it can be a hazard. You can see to get into that controlling and enjoying principle. And if the sadhana goes, it gets weaker, it becomes so much more difficult to tolerate the austerities of managing, you know. So that's why, you know, thank you for your insight, because I had no idea it was 5 years. It's hard for me. Yeah. Anyway, it's you know, this is part of Krishna consciousness because of the wonderful strength of the spiritual energy that Lord Chaitanya is making available to us. It's possible to, like Prabhupada dealing with all this money and all this thing, and this book of the Bombay temple, the Jews story, is wonderful. I was thinking how, you know, from kind of a perspective we have of so many years, how, you know, Prabhupada was the one, you know, who came, you know, who was successful, but he also had certain skills that were necessary. The management of money. I mean, from the days of New York when we had this demonic guy who was trying to teach the devotees and Prabhupada, you know, was able to get most of the money back, and so that whole thing in Juhu where he was able to deal with so many levels, you know, and even to undo the almost catastrophic mistake of his disciples who signed the land back. You know, some of you have read the book already. So, you know, he was perfectly empowered in many ways to do what he did. And you know, we can, if we really, you know, are strong, and we have that tendency. There's a certain type of person who can be a good manager, who what we call charisma, or some, you know, naturally. When that's dovetailed for Krishna, you can do wonderful things when it's really pure. And Srila Prabhupada had that, and all our acharyas had it to a great degree. I don't have it. I can make changes in the books, and that's all I could do. One thing I wanted to mention, in case I forget, some of you may be interested, when Balaram Prabhu was leading the kirtan, which I love his kirtan, I have a video of Balaram. I think you were a Bhakta Balaram. I think you were 18 or 19. And he's dancing ecstatically in kirtan. Mahatattva Prabhu was here, that Bhakti-rasāmṛta Tirtha. And a whole bunch of the old timers that you may remember see that. And I hope I won't embarrass you with that, Balaram. Unless, in case you're interested in seeing it, it's on my iPad, and I won't share it now. You know, have to near the screen, but it's really sweet to see. You know, because Balaram came, this enlivened Mahatattva to stay and work with the bhaktas, because he saw, it's possible to make some very nice bhaktas here. This is one of the reasons he stayed. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. You had another question? I'm sorry. Oh boy. I think I have to go. All right, one more. Sorry.
So the question I have is, Prabhuji, that when the four Kumaras got the instruction from Brahma, they have not obeyed him, right? But then here for Priyavrat Maharaj, when he got an instruction to take it up, he took it up, right? So how do we see?
I'm not going to speculate on that one. I'm going to read the pastime and see how it happened. They were so fixed in renunciation, you know, that they didn't that they defied him, and but the service that they performed, you know, of traveling around and eventually you know, and have their own sampradaya, being, you know, knowledge, was also you know, essential for the whole universe. I mean, it's just, you know, maybe because it was the father, you know, rather than the guru of the guru. I'm not going to speculate. We'll research that. I got to go. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Sorry, I got a lot of work here. Good question, though.